I think a really important thing that every religion has is mythology. And I think the problem is where people get the purpose of the mythology mixed up with the substance of it.
This is Synchronicity.
This is Synchronicity.
This is Synchronicity.
This is Synchronicity.
This is Synchronicity. This is Synchronicity.
Welcome to episode 49 of Synchronicity. Synchronicity? Kind of said that a little funny. Well, I had 48 other episodes to get it right. No, seriously, welcome to episode 49 of Synchronicity. It's hard for me to believe we're at episode 49. 52 will be a year, so that's nuts. Yeah, I've done one every week, and I got a couple recorded, so we're going to hit a year officially. I'll cue in party sounds here or something. My guest this week is J.R. Morton. J.R., very cool guy, works with Ram Dass's foundation, Love Serve Remember, works with the Be Here Now network. Just a cool dude. I'm going to get to J.R. in a second, but first we're going to get to other stuff. Congratulations to this week's book winner. I sent you the email. I don't know your name, but you are getting a copy of Mind Beyond Death by Dzogchen Ponlop Rinpoche. I might just keep giving this book away. I'm about 2/3 of the way through it, and it is absolutely phenomenal. Even books I really like, I speed through them, but this one, the little inner voice inside is saying, slow down, take it in. You're going to enjoy this. And I haven't enjoyed a book this much in a long time. Hat tip to the excellent David Silver who recommended it. Really, just a fantastic book. So congrats to the book winner. Going to do another book giveaway next month. I'll let you know when. Okay, another pretty cool thing going on this week. This episode is brought to you by, that's right, we have a sponsor. This is not made up. This is not tomfoolery. This week's episode is brought to you by the Alan Watts Foundation. And let me tell you how this is going to work. If you go to syncpodcast.com, that's what SYNC podcast.com/Watts, WATTS, you will get taken to the secret Alan Watts online shop. And this shop will be updated pretty much on a weekly basis with some new cool sound clips and other stuff in there. But right now, you can basically purchase any Alan Watts talk, anything that he's ever done on the shop. And if you use the code SYNC, SYNC at checkout, you will get 30% off your first order. Now, some of you may be saying, I love Alan Watts, of course, but all this stuff is on YouTube. It's all over the web. Why should I pay for it? Let me tell you why. There's a few reasons, and I think they're all pretty good reasons. I've paid for them, even though I have access to all this stuff, and I'll tell you why I did. If you know anything about Alan Watts, you will know that he is he's just a wise, profound thinker who inspired people like Ram Dass, even Richard Alpert. Like he really predates a lot of these people, an incredible person. And over the past 10-15 years, a lot of his talks have made their way onto the public open web, and people have been finding them amazingly useful and helpful. The problem with that is people are basically, the people putting those talks up are profiting from them. They're stealing the content, and because his family and the foundation has chosen not to go after these people, because people are finding it valuable, people are turning on monetization on YouTube and basically making, like a few $1,000s a year, serving up other people's content, which to me, not so cool. I've had to deal with this in a lot of ways, working for organizations who are trying to control their copyright. And this is a very interesting topic, and we could argue that, well, everything should be free, it's wisdom, and I am absolutely in the anti-sophist class. Like I'm with Socrates. I don't think people should have to pay for wisdom, but you don't have to pay for this. You can pay for it, and it's more like if you get value out of it, it's the reciprocity of it. The other reason I think it's worthwhile to purchase something from this shop is it's really well organized. A lot of the stuff on YouTube is misnamed. It's edited weird. There's no flow. You don't actually know where it's from and why it was recorded. So if you're into that kind of stuff, this is very helpful as well. The other thing is when you purchase something on this shop, you're basically joining a community. It's this new Alan Watts community that's getting off the ground. There's going to be never before heard stuff. It's not on YouTube. It's not on the torrents. There's going to be interviews with people asked about, their thoughts on Alan Watts and some of the things he said. It's going to be cool. So I feel like there's a lot of reason from your perspective to potentially get this stuff, especially if you like Alan Watts or are interested in Alan Watts and don't know anything about this. And for those of you who have no fucking idea what I'm talking about, at the end of this episode, I'm going to play a little clip from an Alan Watts talk so you can kind of hear what I'm talking about. But anyway, back to the point. This is going to be something, again, if you go to syncpodcast.com/Watts, you will get taken to the shop. Use the code SYNC, sync, at checkout, 30% off. That's pretty cool. And that's how I think I'm going to get these episodes to be sponsored going forward. I'm working on basically like a really cool affiliate system. So something I was talking about with a bunch of people is, we want these podcasts to make money. We want them to be able to support the people who are making them. It's a fair amount of work getting these out. And the problem is we don't want to go to advertisers and just say like, hey, just give us some money. We get this many downloads. We'll promote whatever it is. Yes, that works. And yes, it's cool. And yes, you can even do it in a fun and interesting way. But I really want to make sure that if we're getting advertisers or sponsors, that they're totally aligned with what we're talking about. When I say we, I'm talking about the people on MindPod Network and anyone else who's going to participate in these affiliate programs. That being said, if you're interested in being an affiliate for the Alan Watts Shop and some other things that are coming up that I'll mention, shoot me an email, noah@syncpodcast.com, and I'll hook you up with something. I can get you your own code, and you can let your friends know and get a little percentage. So there's ways that this can work that I think we're going to organically be able to fuse a lot of these things that are going on with the podcast. So that's kind of my plan. We'll see how it goes. And of course, this mindfulness book that we're coming out with from MindPod Network is absolutely going to be a part of that. Okay, again, and I'll say it at the end of the episode, syncpodcast.com/Watts. Use the code SYNC, SYNC, at checkout, 30% off your first order. Pretty cool. Okay, on to the next few stuff I want to talk about. First off. Last week, I guaranteed the Miami Dolphins would win. And holy shit, they needed to go to overtime to do it against a really shitty team. If you're listening, Caleb, I'm talking about your team. But the Dolphins did win. So I don't have to go on a vision quest and take all these psychedelics I have and go understand the meaning of life. Everything is as it should be. The Dolphins beat the Browns. We're good to go. All right, got to get that out of the way. Second thing I want to go over, Fitbit. Who is a Fitbit out there? If you answered, I can't hear you. But still, I got a Fitbit about 4 or 5 months ago, and I am 100% addicted. I also found out I am a psychotic person who will jog around my house to beat people in competitions like a work week hustle, which is where you try to get as many steps as possible during the work week. I'm a psychotic person. So, but I really love Fitbit. If you're on that, add me, find me. I don't know how you do it, but I will compete with you and jog late at night to beat you. So I think it's cool. I like the Fitbit because it taps into that mentality and that aspect where if you're into gaming, you wanna. There's like a leveling up type thing. You get badges. It's fun. The gamification of exercise is definitely working for me. So whatever it takes. Listen, Fitbit plus Pokemon Go, I'm going to be like an Adonis in 2 weeks. Don't worry. Okay, couple updates on upcoming shows. Couple. Robert Wagner, just did a podcast with him on lucid dreaming. Next week, part 2. I will say this. The first one was really cool. I really enjoyed it. The second one I'm going to release next week is amazing. One of my favorite podcasts. We talk about some really, really cool stuff related to spiritual practices and dreaming. And Robert deals, he goes into in more depth to some of his experiences that are fascinating. So yeah, that's going to be good. Stay tuned for that. Also, I have scheduled it. It's locked down for the people who have been asking. Stephen Campman, we're going to talk about dreams. There's a dream theme going on. we're going to be talking about dreams, specifically the book Damien, which Herman Hesse. I don't know why I say his name like that. Herman Hesse. He wrote the book. Steven had me read it before our last podcast, and it's incredible. We're going to kind of give a process of breaking it down and filtering it through a Jungian lens, an individuation process. Very cool. So stay tuned for that. Finally, if you're in New York City this Sunday, I will be there. I am there to go listen to a sound healer type guy. This is totally fucking crazy, but this guy, I've seen him now 3 times. He's got like a 5.5 octave vocal range. Supposedly channels lots of weird stuff. I'm not really into the channeling medium stuff, but I really feel like this guy is doing it. His name is Tom Kenyon. He essentially funnels in these 5th dimensional beings made of light and sound called the Hathors, which I know how crazy this sounds, and I know this is where I'm losing at least a percentage of you. But I will say this. One of the reasons I really like Tom Kenyon, he does the Buddha thing, which is basically, if you don't believe what he's saying or what he's doing, have an imaginary box. And everything you don't believe and, is too weird, put it in that imaginary box. You don't have to believe it like it's the most important thing. It's not a dogma. You're not being asked to join anything. But I gotta tell you, I've asked for a lot of external validation about these Hathors, and they seem pretty legit. Regardless, gonna go there, sucking up the Hathor juice. Wow, that came out wrong. That is not how I meant to say it, but I'm gonna be there Sunday. So if you're around in the city, we're also going to look up at houses in the Hudson Valley. Gonna be making that move soon, folks. So if you're in New York area, come say hi. Drop me an email, noah@syncpodcast.com. Okay. Now we're getting to JR. This is a long intro, I know. JR is a very, very interesting person. I've spoken to JR twice. This conversation is the second of those, and we recorded it. JR works, like I said, with the Love Serve Remember Foundation, which is Ram Dass's foundation, and the Be Here Now Network, and also just has a very interesting story. And he's young, and where his path has taken him thus far. His father passed away last July, which I can only imagine. I mean, I both my parents are here, thank God. I don't know what it's like to lose a parent, but this kind of took him on a path where he started experimenting in a very healthy way, I would say, with psychedelics, starting with mushrooms and then LSD, through some family members who kind of clued him in, has some cool Ram Dass connections there. And then fast forward months later, he's in Maui talking to Ram Dass at lunch. So listen to how he got there. He also has some really interesting perspectives on video games and just life in general. One of these people who I think, a lot of people will hear about someone like Neem Karoli Baba, who is this magical mystery being, just so interesting, and they'll seek out a connection, which is there's absolutely nothing wrong with. I mean, I think that's how it works for a lot of people. But then there are people who have these experiences kind of thrust onto them where they're not really asking, consciously for anything. But all of these things start happening them, synchronicities, lots of stuff. And JR is certainly one of those people. And I like that because it's like, you get to a point where you have all these direct experiences and you just have to kind of accept the fact that, like, okay, something else is going on here. What that is, who knows? We'll see. But JR is definitely one of those people. So this was a very fun episode to record. I am going to shut up now. Thanks to everyone who is rating and reviewing Synchronicity. I absolutely love that and appreciate it. Thanks to everyone who is donating. Don't feel shy. You're allowed to donate. I have an infant son. He's not really an infant anymore. He's like almost 5 months. And he's super cute. So, like every donation, he gets like a sock or something. Oh, baby clothes and diapers. But seriously, thank you to everyone who has contributed in any nice way. You can join the Synchronicity community and be entered in a book giveaway and a bunch of other cool stuff. I send out an email once a week. I try not to be annoying. You can do that at syncpodcast.com. But that's it. Without further ado, here is J.R. Morton. thanks for coming on, man. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah.
Also, I'm recording my microphone and
Oh, great.
Audacity,
So you can send me. Perfect. Yeah, send it to me when we're done, and that'll make it sound a lot better. Awesome.
For sure.
Cool, man. Well, yeah, I mean, I know that we just officially met, like a week ago? Less? Like a few days ago? Not that long ago, but I was really impressed. I know it was just a conversation due to both of us working with Love Serve Remember, Ram Dass's foundation. Really, not even particularly thrilling conversation. It was just about analytics. But in the midst of that, some interesting stories came out pretty organically. And I was like, you know what? I think you would be an excellent guest on the Synchronicity. So thank you.
Cool. Yeah, that conversation was interesting because I pretty much didn't say anything for about 30 minutes straight. And then I was just listening to you explain Google Analytics. And then suddenly you're like, so how'd you get into this? And then,
I mean, one of the things I like about this show, at least for me, is that I talk a lot. I like talking. It's fun. I don't think I'm particularly bad at it, so I like to talk. But this show forces me to ask questions and then kind of get out of the way as much as possible, which listening, I think, is a skill that could benefit everyone, but especially people like me who just kind of yammer on about all this stuff. So, okay. Let's get a little background on who you are. I'm finding out much of this is the first time as our listeners because we don't know each other that well. So why don't you recount our connection? So like I said, we were having a conversation about analytics related to ramdas.org. How did you get involved with ramdas.org?
So my father, I guess I'll have to give you more context than just like I went to Maui and met Ram Dass. Like, there's a little bit more.
Yeah.
I guess my father got sick while I was in college. It started out around the end of my freshman year. He was in an ATV accident, and it broke like 2 vertebrae in his neck and part of his back. And, he wasn't ever quite the same after he had this weight loss surgery. I guess it just made it hard for him to get proper nutrients or something. Like he wasn't getting as much as he was taking in. I think it was something like towards the end of his life, he had to get like 10 times the nutrients a normal person would to get like normal caloric intake. But it got worse every time, I guess. But that caused this issue when he was having the surgery to fix his neck. They put him under anesthesia or whatever, and his I think it was his like magnesium levels were low, and he ended up actually dying on the table. And after that, he definitely wasn't the same. And then it was just like a progressive spiral down. He had like a completely unrelated injury where he like slipped and fell on his leg and then broke his leg. And then when he was in the hospital, he got MRSA, and then he got sepsis and pneumonia. Well, he got pneumonia, and then the MRSA and the pneumonia led to him getting sepsis. And he got through that somehow. And then he was back home and then somehow ended up in the hospital again. And the whole thing repeated itself. And I guess that was the spring of 2015.
Okay.
That he was back in the hospital again. And I was really, I guess I started to grieve before he even died. And I didn't even know at the time. I was at school, and we've just been through so much in the last like 3 years of him slowly getting sicker and sicker,
Right.
My mom wasn't even telling me like what was happening, but somehow I knew, I just it just started happening. Like I started doing poorly in school for no reason, and stuff like that.
Unconsciously or subconsciously, you're like picking into what's going on. Yeah.
And, he he ended up passing away in July, midway through July of 2015. And I was in summer school at the time. I was taking Calculus 2 over the summer at University of Tennessee while all this was happening in Atlanta, Georgia. And I guess when I moved back home after that summer class in August was when things really started to change. I kind of had this feeling that things were going to change whenever my dad passed away, and I didn't know in what manner they would. Then that night that I came home from Knoxville, my brother and his friend had mushrooms, and I decided to partake, and I'd never done them before at that point. I had done a little bit of research on the subject matter. I'd actually met this one guy who was tripping on 2CB in Knoxville, and he was just like talking to me like he was currently tripping on it while talking to me, you know, and I was like, what's it like, you know? I was just really curious, and he was like, man, after you do LSD, you'll never view the world the same again.
That's true.
Yeah, and I took that to heart. I really wanted to know what the difference was. I asked him, I was like, is it like a bad thing or a good thing?
Right.
You know, and he said it's a thing.
You know,
it's
it's the right answer. Yeah.
Yeah, and when he said that, instantly my curiosity took over, and I started watching stuff like DMT, The Spirit Molecule. I watched that on Netflix, and then I haven't read the book, but it's in my house. So, you know, I got interested in all that stuff, and it just so happened that mushrooms entered my life right when I was out of school for a period of time, hanging out with family, reconnecting. Right. You know, it lined up perfectly. And then I learned a few life lessons during that period of time of, you know, I inherited some money after he passed away, and I learned, you know, money doesn't buy happiness really early on. And that was nice, you know, like driving off the lot in a convertible and then just realizing in that moment, like, wow, I feel the exact same I felt driving in my like little Saturn Ion, you know? It's totally the same. And having that experience, I guess it led up to this. I guess it was just a ton of life lessons happening over and over and over again for me in this short period of time that led up to me taking LSD right after Christmas and having this weird trip when we were watching Bruce Almighty.
Right.
And I was just like hearing Bible verses and like not knowing where I'd heard them before, but definitely having heard them. And I told my cousin about it, and then he gave me the book Be Here Now because he'd had it for about 2 years. Someone had given it to him, and it was bought at this used bookstore, and he said he felt like he was supposed to give it to somebody, and he never had given it to anyone, and he just carried it around in his bag in his truck for 2 years and gave it to me. And I didn't even know he gave it to me. I was like, I don't know, I guess I was really tired. We had just come home from Tampa that day or whatever, and I didn't even remember the conversation we'd had. So I woke up and there's just this book on my bed, and I started reading it, and it was all about LSD and the spiritual experience, and then Ram Dass going over to India and meeting this guru. And I was just like, I had to make like a conscious decision at that moment because I'd always been like a Christian, you know?
Yes.
I was raised as a Christian, and, you know, I kind of had fallen into that trap. Well, not so much a trap, but I'd had a spiritual experience through Christianity, and I didn't explore anything else.
Sure.
So I was just like, well, this worked for me that one time, and then I guess I was just hoping it would work again, like, I don't know how it's kind of hard to think about like what your logic was when you were like along like way far back.
Well, what's funny is that in my experience, whenever you look back 5-10 years, like, oh man, how did I ever, why did I think like that? Or why did I act like that if I knew what I knew now? And then you actually do that 10 years past then too. When you look back, you're like, oh, I thought like I knew so much was going on. I think when you get to the point where you realize like, you know what, I'm going to be continuously learning and experiencing my entire life. And yes, it looks like I didn't know a lot by then, but who knows, in 10 years, it could look like, oh my God, that was exactly what I needed and exactly fit into my life in the perfect way. So yeah, I totally know what you mean.
For sure. And hopefully this is that thing, because it's only been 9 months or so since the next part of the story where I moved back to Knoxville after having Red Be Here Now, and plan on going back to school and getting a job up there, because I'd already signed a lease for the year to live in Knoxville, and then my dad passed away and the lease started in August, so like I couldn't get out of it. So I wanted to stay up there, and it just so happened that I had an extra room. So I brought my cousin with me because he needed somewhere to stay. Well, he had somewhere to stay, but he was looking to move,
Yeah.
and he'd have been homeless if he moved anywhere else. So it worked out really well that I had an extra bedroom and he was able to stay, and we were able to kind of like work on each other through our spiritual journey to kind of have like a immediate satsang. I was really surprised to find that a lot of people don't have any sort of like spiritual family at home, and they only get it at retreats,
Well, I mean, I think because you grew up in the Christian atmosphere, which if you're born into that and have any interest in religion, you're going to have a community that's there anywhere you go. There's going to be a church community. There's going to be organizations. I mean, that's a big part of anything. So a lot of people who, don't identify with one of the major religions or don't identify necessarily with the particular teachings of something that they've been exposed to and kind of go on their own path, it's incredibly common. Less so now because there's conversations like this, there's places on the web, and it's much more accessible than it was in the past. But I remember being in a not dissimilar kind of point in my path and just trying to understand this when I was, from the ages of 15 to 18. So that's late 90s, early 2000s. So the internet was around, but it was still kind of in its fledgling thing. And thank God Arrowwood was there. I mean, that was around, but it was tough to link people. And I remember talking about this shit to anyone, unless they had picked up a book or listened to a talk by like Alan Watts or something like that. Like it's very common that people feel isolated, and what you're talking about, and just like actually having your family there, your cousin, is hugely important. The concept of satsang or sangha or just a community that you can, talk to. And also, not to get too far off on a tangent with this, that also applies to everything. Like I do, like business mastermind meetings with some of my friends to talk about ideas related to business. If you can have people, a person or other people to bounce your ideas off and hear what that's like really where the magic starts to happen. It's this interesting time. Like we're talking remotely here. We both work remotely with organizations, but really like communing and talking and really being together in whatever way, digital or otherwise, is incredibly important. So I'm glad you touched on that.
Yeah, it is important. I think that we all kind of build each other up,
Yeah.
And if one person's having a bad day and, their roommate happens to be like a yogi or something, they might be able to tune in to that energy and kind of come out of it,
Totally.
So I guess getting back to that story, Corey, my cousin, had moved up, and that night we scored some LSD, and we had a big party, I guess. And I guess I took a good bit. It was more than I've ever like tried to do again, you know?
Yeah.
And-
A heroic dose.
Yeah. I didn't even think it was heroic. It was only like 300 micrograms.
Back in the day, that's like a dose. But yeah, no, it's, I mean, 300 mics of really good LSD is a genuine bona fide psychedelic trip. So yeah.
Yeah, it was crazy, man. Like, it's just weird going back and thinking that, because that was like my first real trip. Like, all the others were mild. It was like 3 people split and ate the mushrooms.
Right,
the first time,
right.
you know?
Low threshold. Like, oh, I see kind of something's going on. I get it, man. My first one was 900 micrograms of sunshine LSD from San Francisco. So it was a nice little 18-hour journey.
Oh my God. Yeah. So, I guess everything was just kind of gold. Like, you know, I don't know if you know what that's like, but it seemed like all the colors bled together to create this holographic
I know what
gold,
you're talking
you
about.
know?
So you know what's interesting about that? I know exactly what you're talking about. So with Kundalini practices, which is like a Vedic, it's essentially the premise is that there's Shakti coiled up, kind of like a snake from the base of our spine, and it goes up, and there's these nadis, and this energy channels through. And I personally believe I had a Kundalini experience brought on by psychedelics once, and what you're talking about, that gold sheen, where everything is, I know exactly what you're talking about. It's like what it is also, I think physiologically, is our pupils become very dilated, and you take in a lot more than you would, and especially regardless of the light around you. From an esoteric standpoint or energetic standpoint, I do think that's Kundalini energy. There's a great book. I forget the name of it. I think the guy's name is Gopi Krishna, I think. I'll get the name. I'll put it in this podcast notes. He wrote a book. What happened was, he's an Indian guy. And he basically popped open all his Kundalini channel. And it was an incredibly unpleasant, intense experience for like 5 years or something. Like, he couldn't eat. He couldn't breathe. Like, everything, he felt he was on fire. His family, like, he's basically kind of like a Kafka-esque transformation into someone who can't function in the world. And he eventually figured out what was going on and kind of got it under control. But what he described, I think the first day or night he popped it open, was this clear, everything was brilliantly gold, like overwhelmingly so. So that's interesting you describe. I know exactly what you're talking about.
That's interesting. Yeah, so I had that gold on this pyramid shape, and I was at like the head of the pyramid, and I've heard from people that that's like the Godhead experience, and I was hearing all these all these different humming vibrational sounds, and they were really high pitched. I don't want to try to mimic it on Skype, but it was really high pitched, and they all came together to create this one high pitched noise. And as each one like got in sync per se, there was like a green light that lit up on the like lower part of the pyramid, and everything was just kind of happening, but it was all perfect. It was the whole like bliss mixed with union of the universe. It was like a samadhi experience, I guess. And I didn't even know what that was. And I was like reading Ram Dass books months later, and I still didn't even know.
Right, of course.
I made that realization like 2 weeks ago.
No, I totally get it. I know how that goes.
And I guess that experience was then followed up with a full ego death trip where I saw my roommate as if he was like the one, and I saw the clear light behind him, and I die, and when I wake up he says I'm even acting like a baby, and after he leaves the room, and I'm just sitting there like after dying basically, I see all these lives flash before my eyes, and it's a complete third eye experience at this point. The pyramid experience, my eyes were open and my hands were in a triangle, and that's the pyramid I was seeing.
Sure.
And in this other experience, my eyes were closed and there wasn't like light in the room, the lights were off, and I was just sitting there and seeing all these different lives flash before my eyes. And I mean, I'm a Christian, so at the time, and I don't even know what, like, I don't want to like call any of my beliefs now like anything. I'm not really sure, of course, about it all, but it's so crazy having this experience. And then, I kind of skipped ahead, but there was a point right after the pyramid trip where my friend was in the room and I thought I was Neem Karoli Baba, and I was like hugging him and I kissed him on the forehead, and it was just like divine love.
Right.
And I guess it's just so interesting having that experience, which then shot me forward into going to like group meditations and studying Buddhism. And I stumbled upon this book called The Psychedelic Experience by Timothy Leary and Ram Dass, and a third person that I can't remember right now. Ralph Metzner, yeah.
Yeah.
And I didn't even know what it was about. It just looked really cool from the covers,
Yeah,
so
totally.
I bought it. And then, of course, it's got the whole book's about ego death and a psychedelic experience.
That's right.
That's when I realized what my trip was while reading that book. I was like, wait, this is what happened to me. And it's like broken up into the bardos. Like,
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. So, I mean, the way that I like experienced this trip and then was able to break it down, months later, to figure out like different teachings basically that happened, and be able to relate my experience to what these people are talking about in their ancient text. It just worked out so perfectly. It's like a bunch of synchronicities, going off over and over again.
It's true. And we were talking about in our last conversation how those types of experiences, I think, are the most poignant, or some of the most poignant, because you're not inducing a self-fulfilling prophecy. You're not inclined to believe anything. You in fact, sometimes I've had experiences where I don't want to believe actually the synchronicity of the moment, or that this is actually happening. And it comes from someplace outside of yourself, seemingly. Those experiences are what people refer to, I believe, ancient mystics and everyone who's smart modern people. That's direct experience, right? Someone who doesn't believe in God, who hasn't had a divine like experience, you could give them 5,500 million proofs. It doesn't mean shit until you actually experience what's going on, and how you interpret that, which I think is a very, subjective and personal experience and process. But those are the things that are so interesting. I've told this story all the time, like where I used to tell the story of this guy who went to India and went to the Himalayas and gave this guru guy LSD. I would tell that story literally. I mean, if it wasn't 9 times out of 10, it was 8 times out of 10. Every time I tripped, from when I was 15 years old until I was like 25 years old, had absolutely no idea who Ram Dass was. I knew of Richard Alpert, who had went there before, and the books I read, like Acid Dreams and Storming Heaven, had no idea who Neem Karoli Baba was. I then started working in a not dissimilar fashion to Love, Serve, Remember, then pieced together throughout the years that I'd been telling this story about this guy, that I'm working for this organization now. When I was in the Omega Institute, after I had like a very, what I would call a profound spiritual awakening, followed by a profound spiritual crisis and crash, I found myself at the Omega Institute. And I'm walking in this library. It's the Ram Dass library. I'm like, I don't know who that is. And there's a statue. There's a little like thing of Maharaji. And I just stare at him like, I don't know why I know this guy, but I feel like I know what this is. Like, this is something I didn't know anything about anything we're talking about now. Then looking back, it's like, holy shit, there's a thread that connects all this. Those are the experiences like, okay, even if I don't want to believe in the guru sometimes, even if I don't want to believe that everything is connected, even if I don't want to believe in any of this other stuff, like I can't eliminate the things that I had experienced that put them together without me any presupposition of knowledge. So yeah, I love that. I love that you've had those experiences too.
Yeah, it's crazy. And I mean, my mom today posted on Facebook that she doesn't believe in coincidences, and synchronicity translates to a meaningful coincidence.
Right.
And when you take enough coincidences and you add them together, you start to take all this empirical evidence, and it becomes much harder to refute it as something that's just coincidence.
Right,
It's
or
not,
fluke. Right.
yeah,
No meaning behind it. Exactly.
right. Uh, I guess my whole life has had a bunch of synchronicities like that. That there is kind of a thread. I could go back to when I was 4, and my dad got me into video games, and then I loved video games, and he got me into programming when I was like 9. I was learning Java.
Cool.
Yeah, like I figured out how to make websites, and I ran a website all through high school. That was a really active forum, and just having those skills worked out so well when I eventually had this meeting with Ram Dass, and everything just clicked. Like day one, I got to sit at the table with Ram Dass, and he was by himself at the time, which never happens at
This
those
is
retreats.
at the retreat, right?
Yeah, like day one at lunch, and I got to meet Raghu and got set up to meet Kelly, and then I was working with Kelly doing some stuff later on in the retreat before, like by day 2,
Yeah.
And then like 3 weeks later, Raghu's like, "We need you to help with these podcasts and videos if you can do it."
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, I've totally done YouTube channels, and I can help with websites too. Like all this stuff I've done in the past, that all of it was related to playing video games and programming, but
Right.
it completely translates to podcast networks and running like websites that are WordPress based,
Totally.
It's incredible.
Well, talk about getting started kind of on this path, which is now these skills are valued professionally. The same way that I basically fell into digital strategy is I used to run a personal blog on Blogger back in like 2005, 6, around then. And that led to me learning Google Analytics, right? That now is a very prized skill because it's basically determines how a website is working, which is how we met talking about this stuff. Video games too. I mean, video games, I play a lot of video games. So I was just telling people recently, I was at the farmer's market. My wife took a picture of it, but I'm like battling a kid in Pokemon at the farmer's market, and I look like an idiot just like tapping my phone like ridiculously. I really love video games, and I think there's a few reasons I love them. One is from an early age, especially with games like Final Fantasy, some of these narrative-driven role-playing games, they're just really, really, really excellent works of art. Like, if nothing else, no other mystical, no other relationship stuff, they're just really well-produced things. People care about this. Secondly, I think there's a wonderful relationship between playing a video game, controlling these avatars as we do with controllers now, and waking life and running our lives. People refer to like leveling up in life, all of these things. There's even a game over in life. There's these parallels that run very, very close together, and I think are intersecting, especially when you start to consider some of this VR stuff that is starting to come out. And that's blurring the lines, even physiologically, how people interpret what's going on in a virtual world, how that actually relates to life. So I forget, at the beginning of this conversation, we were talking about something. You mentioned video games. Oh, because you're gaming headphones. So I was like, what kind of headphones are those? So talk a little bit about why you love video games. So your dad got you into games. What were your first games you were playing?
I don't even remember the name of it. It was this weird maze game, and we were flying a little plane around, and I don't know, it looked like we were in a space station. I have no idea, but I just remember that being like the first game I played. And then he liked to play Madden.
Oh yeah,
and
of course.
the NCAA football games,
of course,
and all that. And I guess I was in 4th grade. My dad bought SOCOM US Navy SEALs for PlayStation 2.
Sure.
And it came with a headset, and I was trying to use the headset, and I was like 9, so I was a little squeaker talking in the chat, and it was great. But that got me started in online gaming, and I really enjoyed playing SOCOM from like 4th grade until 7th or 8th grade. So I guess 9 years old to 13 years old, I was pretty much addicted at points.
Yeah,
to
totally.
It was so much fun.
Yeah.
I had a clan, and we got on and did clan battles. It was a blast. And then sometime in 8th grade, I got into playing Guitar Hero, and I just wanted to be good at it. I don't know. It looked like so much fun to play on expert.
Yes.
I started out on easy, and I beat the game on easy in like one day, and then I did medium. But then hard, you had to incorporate your pinky, and well, I guess you had to use your pinky on medium too, but like you had to slide
really
5 buttons and with 4 fingers. It was kind of really complex if you didn't know what you were doing.
Yeah.
And I got really into Guitar Hero, and I started getting to where like I could get 100% on all the songs. And I mean, that took actual like mindfulness and practice.
Oh yeah. It's practice. You can't do
crazy.
that. Yeah.
I mean, it's insane level of practice to like some of the songs you had to actually tap with like you do the hammer-ons where you're like hitting it with like 2 fingers, like on with your right hand. I don't even know. It was just insane, but that was really cool because it taught me the value in slowing it down and really going step by step to learn everything from like a basic level. And it helped me with my actual rhythm with real music.
I was gonna say, I see a guitar. I think I see tablas.
Yeah.
What you play other instruments? Yeah?
Well, I got really inspired when I was in Maui, and I bought a harmonium.
Yeah, I got one after my second retreat too. Love the harmonium.
It's so much fun.
It's really fun. I played it on mushrooms once. That was really fucking nuts. That was it wasn't a heavy dose. I probably took like 2 grams, but I was alone. It was during a work day, like on a Friday. I like cut a half day short, and I was like, oh, I have this harmonium. Like I'll trip while my I guess she was my fiance at the time is at work, and it was really pretty awesome, pretty cool instrument.
I have an interesting story about that.
Yeah, let's hear it.
So I was tripping on just like 1 tab of LSD with my friend Ryan, and he's gonna love it because I've not mentioned him on the only 2 podcasts I've ever been on. But I met him in Knoxville at this group meditation thing. So here's another synchronicity.
Sure.
Second group meditation I go to on a Friday night, there's only like 3 people that ever showed up, and then me and Ryan both showed up to this one. And afterwards I was talking to him in the parking lot, and he asked me like if how I got into Buddhism or whatever. And I showed him this book called Be Here Now that was in my car, and he pulls out his phone, and it's got Neem Karoli Baba as the screensaver, and he's like, oh, I already know all about that. So I was like, let's exchange numbers, we'll hang out sometime. There was another group meditation at the same place on like Monday that a lot more people went to, and I invited him to come to that, and that was the only one he ever went to, but we ended up hanging out afterwards, and we didn't really talk much, or like stay in touch or anything afterwards. And I hit him up sometime after I went to that retreat in Maui in May, asking if he wanted to hang out. And he's like, oh, I live in South Carolina now. So I was like, all right, whatever. And then in July, I went to Taos with Raghu and Saraswati for the Bandara they did.
Hanuman Jayanti. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, no, because we did Hare Krishna for 24 hours. It was
okay, something else.
Yeah, I forgot what it was for. Oh, Guru Purnima.
Exactly, that's what it was. Yes.
And lo and behold, I like go and sit down in the temple room, and Ryan is right there behind me in New Mexico, and I'm just like, what are you doing here?
That's hilarious.
And then he ended up driving home because he had road tripped out there. And on the way through, I'd just gotten LSD like the day before, and he stayed at my house that night, and we tripped, and it was wonderful. It was a very pleasant night, and he was playing the tabla and just sitting there with like his ear up next to it, just hitting it all the different ways you can. I mean, it's just really interesting watching people on psychedelics.
It is very interesting, right?
Exploring it.
It's pretty interesting. I've had the pleasure of babysitting back in the day a lot of my friends and people who would do it, and it is interesting. I mean, you really get to see it's honestly the only other correlation I could draw for it is I never understood when people were like, oh, well, you know, you see the world through your children's eyes. Now I have a kid and I actually get what they're talking about when like I'm pushing my son who's 4 months old in a stroller around the neighborhood. I can watch him experience like a tree or birds or like this car going by, and you look at their eyes and you actually see like kind of what's going on. It's pretty nuts. The same thing for psychedelics. People are in that kind of like amazed, awe-filled state, and the way they interact with things can really give you insight into how they're experiencing stuff. I know exactly what you're talking about. It's great.
Do you think that might have something to do with mirror neurons?
I do. I do think it has something to do with mirror neurons. I mean, I think obviously they're just now discovering what mirror neurons do and allow us to kind of experience like empathetic joy and things like that, and even learning things like, you know, when a child sees you know, you do something and then emulates it, like there's obviously some connection going on there. Yeah, I mean, I do. I'm very much interested in the physiological connections between kind of the more esoteric kind of, you know, stuff that you can't really see or observe empirically. And I think hopefully, you know, as time continues to go on, that's explored more and more. And it seems like neuroscientists are doing that. So yeah, I definitely do.
That's awesome. Yeah, I kind of agree. We just did a podcast, or I guess it wasn't a podcast, but it was a blog post on the Here Now Network about mirror neurons and how you can feel empathy for someone just by observing their predicament.
That's right. It's pretty, I mean, that's I think the goal. The more you can do that, the more you tap into the fundamental truth of the world and reality, which is we are interconnected. You touch the web somewhere there, it's going to affect it somewhere else. I mean, that's it's like a mystical and esoteric truth that's hard to kind of remember as we go throughout our days and kind of get caught up in our own machinations and all these things. But yeah, I mean, I think the more you can, I think it's mudita. I think that's the Pali word for it. That's basically sympathetic joy, right? Experiencing, and this is a hack. This really is a hack in life. If you can learn to do this is amazing. When you can genuinely feel happiness and joy when something happens good to someone you know or someone you even don't know, you're pretty much going to be predisposed to be happy most of the time. And that's really pretty fucking awesome. It means you don't actually have to be the person who won the lottery. You don't have to be the person who, you know, had a kid. You don't have to be the person who went on a great vacation. You can see the people having fun and be like, oh my God, that's so amazing. You know, that's a little cheat code for life.
Yeah. I think having an open heart is part of that, though. I know just from my perspective, the more open that my heart has gotten on this journey, the more I've been able to feel that for people. Otherwise, you know, if you're too stuck in your ego,
sure,
you know, you're not even going to see that someone's enjoying life, you know, if it doesn't pertain to you.
It's totally true. I mean, I think this is the balancing act that we have to walk in modern society. The way to succeed, quote unquote, in the world, assuming you want the things that are presented to us as though we should want them, is if you have an open heart, it can actually be a detriment, right? I mean, people they hear you say something like, hey, yeah, open heart. That sounds great, but what happens when this is going on? Here's my classic question. This is what I'm going to start asking people because I'm trying to reconcile it. So I was reading a story in this book about this Tibetan master who actually like gave oral instruction to the Dalai Lama, Kangro Rinpoche. Anyway, he's telling this story of he's going to this monastery in Tibet. This is before the Chinese invaded, and he's walking up with his like teacher, and these monks come running out. They're running, flying out of the monastery. They're like, stop. And they're like, what? And they like, there's this ant right in front of them. They're like, you're going to step on the ants. You're going to step on the ant. And he's highlighting that these people are so concerned for the well-being of all sentient beings that like, you can't even kill an ant, right? So this is my issue right now. We have an ant infestation problem in our house, right? They come from the kitchen. You leave something out too long. There's a whole swarm of them. So like, I'm basically like, I am Ant Hitler. I am creating basically a horrible genocide for ants. And like, I'm aware of it. It's not just, I'm like, fuck these ants. Fuck them. Like, oh, I'm sorry, ants. I have to kill off like 1,000 of you right now because you're doing it. So this is the kind of the reason I find this to be a particularly interesting question is how do you walk the line between being open-hearted, generous, compassionate, which I think you have to have some base level of extending that at all times, but doing it in a way that doesn't actually interfere. Like, it's one thing if I'm like, you know what, these ants are valuable people. Sorry, Alexis, my wife and Eli, we're going to have ants now. You know, and I was reading like another story, like, there was this sadhu who was like this enlightened being, and like he let lice live on him. Like he let them live on him because he didn't want to harm them and he wanted to like feed them. And like he was doing it in a way that kind of made sense, but like it was like, all right, I don't know if I need to get to the level where like that's like too crazy. So I bring this up because I know that for people listening, including myself, open-heartedness is such a critical part of living a happy, meaningful, and fulfilling life. It's totally important. But also having this wisdom to know when to do certain things and how to gauge. Like open-heartedness, if you're working with a sociopath, it can be a very dangerous thing, right? That person is going to take advantage of that situation in ways that isn't going to help you spiritually, them spiritually, anyone spiritually. So I think the two things to remember when we're talking about this stuff is that yes, open-hearted, but also yes, discernment, wisdom. When those two things are combined, this is why I love the Bhakti and Buddhism thing. To me, that's a wonderful illustration of a key principle in Buddhism, which is the merging of emptiness and bliss, right? The Bhakti is the bliss and the Buddhism is the emptiness. And emptiness doesn't mean void and nothing. It means spaciousness more than emptiness. So yeah, I totally am with you. Open-heartedness is a prerequisite for experiencing what we're talking about, sympathetic joy.
I really feel like having an open heart, like you said, is core. And I kind of look at it whenever I guess the other day I had to perform a massacre on these fleas that had taken over the trash can, and there was like little eggs or something, I don't know. But
larvae, yeah.
I had to kill them, and I even said a little prayer beforehand. Right. I was like, please, like, I at least had to make peace with myself for the massacre that was about to happen. And, you know, I guess I look at it like it's the play of life, and there's even a Buddhist temple, the biggest Buddhist temple in the U.S. in Colorado. They use pesticides. So, I mean, if they can justify it, I can justify it on a much smaller scale. And also, you know, perhaps that ant got put into your life to be killed for a reason. You know, maybe it's done its work here for whatever work an ant does. You're right. I don't know, but
you're talking about awareness too. That's the decider in this stuff. If you're doing these things with awareness, it's not that there's necessarily a right or wrong, right? The karma for that ant and for me could be that, you know, I am harming it in one way, but for a greater purpose. But the awareness that you're doing it in the first place is what I think is you're keying into, which is incredibly important.
And Ram Dass also talks about having compassion for suffering. So when you see somebody suffering, on one level you see it's horrible, but on another level you see it's completely perfect and it's just happening, and it's required for them to move further on in their spiritual work in some way, right? So you can have compassion for the ant as you,
Slaughter it.
yeah, you know, like it's painful, like it hurts to do it, but just because it hurts to do it doesn't mean that like
That's right.
you're not gonna do it.
So this is another interesting thing. So in Buddhism, and especially in Tibetan Buddhism, Vajrayana, half of the deities are wonderful, loving, beautiful gods and goddesses, and then the other half are wrathful. And they're not wrathful because they're assholes. They're not wrathful because they're evil. They essentially, and they have swords and they're cutting off. What those really represent is cutting through ignorance, using that strong, basically Vajra compassion, this wisdom compassion to cut through ignorance and delusions, which is, you know, in any given situation, the seeds of that can exist. So yeah, I mean, this is good, important things to be discussing, because I know a lot of people, I know this from social media, right? I ran Ram Dass's social media page, and I trained my buddy who's running it now, and all of these other ones for a lot of these big teachers. And what you were just talking about, there's a post on ramdas.org. Raghu's going to love this. We're talking about ramdas.org. There's a post it's all perfect. And it's exactly what you described. It's Ram Dass was having trouble with something. He went to Maharaji. He couldn't understand why there'd be this suffering in the world. And Maharaji basically says, listen, it's all perfect. Like, the suffering does have a place too. There's a reason it's happening. It's not meaningless. So I'll post that. I used to post that on social media. And immediately you will see one in the first comments, oh yeah, well, it's all perfect. How do you explain starving in this country? How do you explain genocide? How do you explain terrorism? And what it obviously is, more than anything else, this is why I love these types of things, is it shows you where that person is at more than anything else. And you could have a discussion. You can try to attempt to say, well, listen, it's not saying that this is a good thing that this is happening, but they're saying that there is potentially reasons for this, and it may be beyond our conception to understand, which is not the lazy man's way out to say, well, I don't have to think about this anymore, but it's to broaden our perspective to see that maybe our limited viewpoints on what's going on isn't the full picture. But I like that these things kind of draw this out of people, because there's one thing I fundamentally believe. It's, before embarking on any major work to help in the outside world, start with yourself. Start with this. You have to start at home. You have to make sure that when you encounter situations that are going to be difficult, especially if you're trying to help in a large scale in any way, if you don't deal with your own shit, your own shadow elements, as Jung would put it, you're going to be in for a rocky fucking ride. You're in for a rocky ride no matter what. Life is a rocky ride, but if you're not dealing with the things that are there anyway, it's tough. So, yeah.
Man, yeah, that's very true. I feel like when I embarked on this journey, I guess if you could say I started on it about January of 2016.
Yeah.
It was really weird, because I'd never done really any work to open my heart. So whatever was open was just from my upbringing and where I was at naturally. And
yeah.
Oh,
related to Christianity, because I mean, I remember you telling me you had very visceral spiritual experiences.
I did have I had a couple prior to this experience, that I guess these experiences that started this year. The first one being when I got baptized. You know, it was just a really small thing, but we'd done this car wash that day, and I'd had flip-flops on, and the chemicals like made my feet swell up. And whenever I got baptized, the moment I got dunked back, my feet were completely back to normal. It was crazy.
Yeah.
And then the other experience was, and I guess that happened when I was 11. So for age context there, I was 11. And then when I was 14, right at my birthday, going from 13 to 14, was another spiritual experience induced through, I guess they did this people getting saved by Jesus thing.
Sure.
Where, like, people stand up and they accept their savior. I wasn't even paying that much attention. I kind of went into a trance, and then when they said stand up, I just stood up, and then I was like one of only 5 people, and it felt natural, but at the same time I felt like I wasn't paying any attention, and I just stood up, and not everyone stood up, and I understand what's happening, and like suddenly I was overcome with emotion and
Right.
tears and crying, and people in my small group were crying. There's like 6 of us out of 12 that were just in tears. It was a crazy experience, and that always gave me that kind of peace. My mom calls it the peace of Christ, but
Yeah.
it's that peace that it's past everything that you can understand. Somehow you still have this peace about you that amid all the chaos, you're still floating along.
I'm familiar with the piece of Christ, which is I was born Jewish. I didn't really study anything about Jesus, but I had a couple of psychedelic experiences where I really feel like I tapped into Christ consciousness, overwhelmingly so. And I know that piece. And I think that Jesus and Christian mysticism and the parts of Christianity that aren't, politically and susceptible to corruption are some of the most beautiful teachings we have, period, in the history of what we ever know about religion and philosophies. I mean, Christ is, regardless of whether you think Christ was a real person, I happen to, or whether you think he's a prophet or a saint, I happen to. There's some really good stuff there. And I think that energy that you're talking about and your mom refers to as the peace of Christ, I do think that's a real thing. I mean, I think that's something that carries over. And if you look at it the right way and you do enough investigation, internally, externally, reading, meditation, I think you pretty much tap into that this is something that transcends all philosophies and religions. And any religion that would specifically say, well, no, this isn't like this in other places, investigate. That's what I would say. Just investigate, because I don't think, like you said, well, this current path, this is maybe a new permutation of your path, maybe you were a caterpillar before and now you're a butterfly, or maybe not, whatever it is, whatever metaphor you want to use. This is something that I think is, these seeds are born in us. Like, they come with us as a package. And if the conditions are around to kind of have this stuff grow, they'll manifest and grow. So I think you've probably been on this before birth, as evidenced also by your trip where you're seeing all these past lives.
Yeah, I know, right? Yeah, I don't know. I must have some connection to Neem Karoli Baba in the past. I don't know. And I mean, he said Hanuman and Jesus are the same.
Same thing.
And, you can go out on a limb and make claims that some people think Neem Karoli Baba is an incarnation of Hanuman.
Absolutely.
And I mean, ultimately, when I was reading Be Here Now the first time, I just interpreted Neem Karoli Baba as Indian Jesus. Like, as like, all right, I mean, I'd always had the issue of like, why do all these religions have reincarnation? This religion that I was culturally brought up in doesn't incorporate it, and they say this guy came down and is the son of God, and there are no other sons of God. That's it. Like, they put themselves in a box at that point. Like,
the Abrahamic religions all did that. And I think it was more, from my understanding and just reading about this stuff, it was less to do with the philosophical and transcendental aspects of the religions and more to do with the cultural and societal implications of these patriarchy dominated societies that, also had a lot to do with agriculture and kind of just shaping the world. They started taking over. And the first thing they started doing is they kicked out all the goddesses. And they said, there's no relationship between masculine and femininity. The only relationship is men are better. This is dominant. We don't want this stuff. Because a lot of the priest class, especially in Christianity and Judaism, all this stuff carries down to Islam. There's danger in femininity. I mean, if you look at the representation, one representation of the feminine divine in Hinduism is Kali. That's a scary fucking thing if you don't know what it means. That's a destructive force that can really fuck with order and, logic and all of these things. I think that aspect of Christianity had probably more to do with cultural and societal implications. I mean, if you look at what Jesus said, a lot of what he said does not line up with any of the other stuff in the Bible. It's almost like directly like the Yahweh Old Testament stuff. Like, you know, it's tough to reconcile those two things. This message of love and peace and harmony. It's like, oh yeah, but you're gonna die if you do this. Are you gay? We need to stone you. Sorry, that's our compassion. So that's an important distinction, because I think there's so many beautiful things about Christianity, just so many really awesome. And I think that's why it's still to this day is a very popular religion, is there's some real truths and beauty there. It's just when it's mixed and conflated with all of these other things, you can kind of get like a nasty, weird replication of it that doesn't really represent what it is.
Yeah, and the replication that we have of it right now is unfortunately being used the same way that religion has been used throughout time, and it's used politically, and that's what's really that's what makes me have an issue with it. And maybe I'm just against the establishment too much or whatever. You know, it just, when things get changed in the book to make things work better politically, it like devalues the religious text for me. And I really loved, I guess Gandhi said it best, like, I love your Christ but not your Christians. You know, I never connected with Christians, and I was in a Christian fraternity, and I was in small groups in high school and going to church all the time, and I did sports and was in the like FCA, I guess, like the Fellowship of Christian Athletes, and I just never connected with them because I honestly felt like I was being judged on like my decisions because I didn't agree with everything in the Bible, and I would be open about that. And it's just like, you know,
well, you're challenging people's egos more than anything else. That's what it is when someone says, hey, I'm JR, I believe in this. I'm Noah, I believe in this. This is who I am. This is what I do. You have two options. You can believe that story is totally true, or you can say, when I look at this, these things who I think I am, I mean, psychedelics are very helpful for this. Meditation is very, very helpful for this. It dissolves these conceptions of ideas of what is actually going on. But if you're in the world and you have identified, especially when faith is involved, which is a tricky thing, when beliefs are involved, where it's like if someone insults your mother or your family, you're going to get upset. Like, this is my mom. How dare you? How dare you do this? You're identifying with something, and then you're susceptible for the grasping and aversion that comes along with that, especially when it comes to, I mean, the funniest thing to me about this, JR, is there's a new brand of atheism that's about, which is hilarious to me because it's basically religion. These people are so utterly against all manifestations of religion or faith or anything. They're 100% sure there is no God. They're not agnostic. They know there's no God, and they're basically acting like a religion. They're saying, we know this. And you say, well, no, I believe in God. Well, you're an idiot. You're an idiot. There's no way there could be a God. It's like, well, you're acting just like the thing that you hate. Like, you can't be certainty. There's no certainty here in this. Like, you know, as much as I've read, and I tend to take these people who seem very wise and very smart, and I use my direct experience and I use my intuition, I believe there's life after death in some way. I don't know exactly what it resembles, but I'm confident on it. That being said, I don't remember dying the last time, so I can't say this is exactly what happens. And I would never go and say, well, when you die, this is exactly what happens. You can say, well, the Tibetan Buddhists believe this is what happens. The Hindus believe this is what happens. You know, the Egyptians believe this is what happens, but there's this rigidity that comes with identifying with things that can really make it counterproductive to trying to grow and evolve and understand this as best as we can. So I'm not surprised you encountered that. You know, a phrase that I think is incredibly important with all of this stuff when discussing this is, you know, always be careful not to throw the baby out with the bathwater. And it seems like you pretty much did that. You believe in Christ. There's still something there. And I think that's important to kind of relay, because I'm sensitive to how religions are discussed, because I think there's validity in almost every single religion. I haven't encountered something where I'm like, nope, maybe Scientology. But is that really a religion? Maybe there's like a few things where it's like, okay, I don't know about that. That definitely seems way off. I don't think 747s were in space. Just saying. But, for the most part, I do think there is validity in all religions. And I think that's important to honor.
I think a really important thing that every religion has is mythology. And I think the problem is where people get the purpose of the mythology mixed up with the substance of it. So when you are told Noah was, or I guess Noah was on the ark or whatever, right? And you don't have to take that literally. What the story is doing is it's painting a picture that your imagination can create, because that is how we can manifest God in our own minds, is to use our imagination to create it. So when you have these stories that point you in the direction of some esoteric truth, that's really what's happening through the mythology. And, Hanuman and Ram and Krishna and all the Hindu gods and all that, like, I don't know who they were, if they're talking about real people or not. But what's important is the story and the concept of I guess they call it Guru Purnima, or not Purnima, Guru Kripa. And that's kind of like Christianity. It's surrender to the guru.
This isn't everything. I was reading this last night in Tibetan Buddhist book called Beyond Death, that the practice that a lot of people resort to, ordinary and advanced, is at the moment of death, they picture their guru about a foot above their head or in their heart center. And that's the easiest way to kind of ensure a favorable birth, because it's something you can do. And the Tibetans do a very intense Vajrayana practice where they basically visualize down to like the very detailed of details. It's yeah.
It all breaks down to the same kind of concept. And there's a lot of different spiritual practices out there, and people interpret things differently. Like shamans talk about spirits, helping spirits that come to them, and they have all these different ideas. But I ultimately feel like it's all coming from within the higher self. And these spirits are, like, they may be portraying themselves as external, but if we're all connected in one, it's still somehow internal as well as.
That's right. They're manifestations of mind, if you're looking at it from one perspective. And I am of the belief, I don't know this, but I do believe that these gods and goddesses, even going to Greek gods and goddesses, I do believe that these are actual realms that exist out there. I think almost anything that can be imagined exists fundamentally somewhere. And this level of 3D reality, no, probably not. That being said, I do think those spirits or angels or, subconscious archetypes, I do think they interact with our world. I think they're below our threshold of experience. So we can't say with certainty, oh, well, there's Hanuman. He just jumped out of that door. There he is. But I've heard from a lot of people, even who've written into the show, who tell me things they experience in their dreams, weird synchronicities of seeing stuff. So I think these things overlap. But I think what you're talking about is, again, incredibly important. The juice behind myths and mythology, the symbols and the things, the lessons that they try to impart. Like, this is a fact. People learn through narratives. That's why some of the most successful people in modern and ancient culture were some of the best storytellers, whether they're musicians, artists, orators, whatever it is. It's that's like with Joseph Campbell and the monomyth, the hero's journey. That is a tried and true thing that is identified all over the world independently, because it is how we kind of interact with this world. Because if you think about it, most of what we're doing all day long is telling ourselves stories. Well, this is who I am. This is where I am. This is what I like. This is what this person did. This is why they did it. And it's something that we just naturally seem to have built into us. And if you conflate that with literal things that are going on, like Noah was 700 years old. Well, maybe there was a Noah 700 years old, but I don't think the story of Noah's Ark is necessarily that there was all these animals in the boat. It was that something happened, there was a reason it happened, and there's a lesson in it. So try to figure out what the lesson is rather than saying, oh, okay, we're literally interpreting this. There's no dinosaurs, or we lived with dinosaurs because we empirically, it says that in the Bible. It's like, okay, maybe not. Maybe not. Okay, I'm gonna cut this off. We're gonna have another podcast. I think we can do some really interesting things because I've really enjoyed this conversation, and it's just been like an effortless back and forth, which I love. But I'm gonna end with 4 questions. It used to be 1. Now there's 3 little quick ones, and then 1 at the end. So first question: what's your favorite color?
Oh. See, that my culture influences that already, because I want to say orange because I went to University of Tennessee and
the Vols.
Yeah. I guess I go with like my actual favorite color that I think looks best on things is kind of like a light blue.
Nice.
Yeah.
What's your favorite number?
2.
Cool. Very cool. What is your favorite animal?
Ooh. My spirit animal I was given as a joke by my fraternity was a giant otter. But I'm going to go with just a plain old... No, I want to say dog. We're going to ask me that question again because I want to say dog, but I know that like my real favorite animal is probably a koala bear.
There you go, koala bear. We got to it.
It's hard though because I just love all the different animals. So
I know
much.
it can shift. I'll ask you again. We'll see if it's still koala bear. Okay, last question. Offer or share a practical tip that has helped you in your life that you think would benefit listeners.
Probably one that I need to practice more of is just always going back and checking over what you've done. So like if you have to turn in a project or something for someone, just like making sure that you go back and like double or triple check it is really important. Like I think I sent Ragu the wrong video link like 3 times in a row or something, and I've been very mindful ever since then of ensuring everything is perfect before I click send in the email.
It's a really good practical tip. It's also, when you do that, you can find, I think when you review things, maybe if it's just a link or something, it's not the same, but when you write an email, if you review it a couple times before you send it, you may pick up on a tone sometimes that you didn't intend to have because something was going on or you were experiencing. So I like the reviewing and checking is a very good practical tip. JR, this has been super duper fun. We're definitely going to have to do it again. And I think we should talk about some other stuff too, because there's a lot of synergy and crossover with what's going on. So thank you so much for coming on.
Oh yeah, no problem. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, cool.
Now, existence, you see, is something that is spontaneous. The Chinese word for nature, zizhan, means that which happens of itself. Your hair grows by itself. Your heart beats by itself. You breathe pretty much by itself. Your glands secrete their essences by themselves. You don't have voluntary control over these things. So we say it happens spontaneously. So when you go to sleep and you try to go to sleep, you interfere with the spontaneous process of going to sleep. Try to breathe, real hard, and you find you get balled up in your breathing. So, if you're going to be human, you just have to trust yourself to have bowel movements and go to sleep and digest your food. Of course, if something goes seriously wrong and you need a surgeon, that's another matter. But by and large, the healthy human being doesn't, right from the start of life, need surgical interference. And he lets it happen by itself. So with the whole picture, that is fundamental. You've got to let go and let it happen. Because if you don't, you're going to be all clutched up. You're going to be constantly trying to do what can happen healthily only if you don't try. But we have a strange anxiety in us that if we don't interfere, it won't happen. Now that's the root of an enormous amount of trouble. But the basis of it all is this. If we say, you must survive, or I must survive, life is earnest, and I've got to go on, then your life is a drag, and not a gain. Now it's my contention, my personal opinion, this is my basic metaphysical axiom, shall we put it that way, that existence, the physical universe, is basically playful. There is no necessity for it whatsoever. It isn't going anywhere. That is to say, it doesn't have some destination that it ought to arrive at.
And thank you for listening past the music, dear listener. A reminder, there is, what you just heard is the Alan Watts clip that I played. If you're interested in any way, shape, or form of either being an affiliate, getting this discount, if you're interested in being an affiliate for this store, send me an email, noah@syncpodcast.com, and we'll talk about it. If you're interested in getting that 30% discount from the Alan Watts shop, go to syncpodcast.com/Watts, enter the code SYNC, SYNC, at checkout. You got 30% off. Bing, bang, boom. So yeah, that's it. Next week, stay tuned for the episode with Robert Wagner, part 2 on lucid dreaming. Seriously, it's a doozy. It's awesome. But that's it, really, officially. Thank you, and I will see you next week.